Previously, we had talked about using media access control addresses to do filtering on Wi Fi networks. I had mentioned at one point that the MAC address is sometimes called the hardware address. It's also sometimes called the Ethernet address. And the reason it's called the hardware address specifically is because it's actually bound to the hardware. It is generally considered to be burned into the device. It is stored in firmware, and it is something that's not supposed to be changed, which is why we can do filtering with it. So I set up filters in my wireless access points that protect myself against particular MAC addresses or only allow particular addresses in and protect me from everybody else in the world. The problem with that, though, is that you can actually change your hardware interface address. Now, I'm on a Mac OS system here. This is one way of doing it. With more recent versions of Mac OS X, this has become a little bit harder to do. You may have to jump through some additional hoops, but this is basically the idea. I'm going to use ifconfig. I'm going to specify EN0 as my network interface. I'm going to change the Ethernet address, and then I'm going to give it an address. So, as I said, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the specific version of Mac OS that you're using, as well as whether you're using a wireless interface, which would be managed by the airport subsystem, or if you're just using a standard Ethernet interface, like you've got an actual RJ45 jack in your computer. With Linux, there are some additional options. I can actually use a program called MacChanger. MacChanger will actually allow me to change the MAC address in this way. I can specify a MAC address, or more interestingly, let's just take a look at Mon1. Currently, it's 28-0F-47-6E. I need to shut the interface down before I can do anything with it. Mon1 down. I'm going to use ifconfig to shut that interface down. And now I can use MacChanger, and I'm going to specify random, which means it's actually going to pick for me. And I'm going to say Mon1. So previously, it was 28-0F-47 and so forth, and theoretically, it is now AECFCB. Let's take a look at ifconfig Mon1. And sure enough, there it is, AECFCB3A646020B4. That's the new MAC address for that particular device. Now, of course, I can say ifconfig Mon1 up, and I can turn the interface back up so it's functional again. Now, this is Linux. I can also change the MAC address in Windows. That requires a little bit of registry editing as a general rule, although there are some interfaces where you can get into the properties on the network card and actually change it there, but you can certainly change it in the registry under Windows as well. So we were talking about Mac filtering. It's a great idea. The problem is that it can be bypassed. It does require somebody to actually know one of the good MAC addresses in order to change to a known MAC address if you are using whitelisting. If you're using blacklisting, then all somebody's got to do is change their MAC address to any other MAC address, and they'll be able to get into your network if you are doing blacklist filtering on your wireless access point. And again, you can use ifconfig under Mac. There are other utilities that you can run on the Mac as well that will change your interface address. And of course, you can use MacChanger under Linux. And then, as I said, under Windows, you can either do some registry editing, or if you've got the right kind of card, you can go into the properties on the card, look for the hardware address, and you should be able to change them in those properties on that network card as well.